It's easy to be negative about remakes. Fun too. And I think a lot of negativity towards remakes comes not even from questions of quality, but legitimacy. You're presenting as the same film again, but without the critical factor of originality. What are your artistic reasons? Here I'm looking at what it means to get a remake right, and how some remakes, not very many of them, but some, are more than just artless cash-ins. By the way, did you see The Predator? Remakes and reboots, which are more or less remakes without that title, for these purposes at least, are nothing new. They have a rather mixed reputation, although they're now cemented in Hollywood as standard practice. My own reaction to hearing that they're remaking something is the same I would have if I heard that a friend with a boa constrictor and addiction to sleeping pills had mysteriously disappeared. It's a shame, but we knew it was going to happen. And who'll look after Lumpy now? I know I'm not the only one resistant to remakes, but why? Well, it feels as though they're often just redoings of films, worse redoings, that often miss the point of the original, or discard some of the factors that made the original worth watching in the first place. If the original was funny, they, the Hollywood Omni, make it serious, or not funny.
Gonna leave a mark!
Or they just do a film that has very little connection with the IP other than cosmetically.
Well, I don't know if that's magic or tragic.
To get a reboot right, whether it be a remake, a reboot, a reimagining, or whatever, I think you have to recast the concept. The concept is the reason that the film that's getting remade ever became popular in the first place. And I think what an audience wants in a remake, if they want a remake at all, is a retelling of the established concept in an original way. So I'm going to go through 3 titles, 6 films, and explain how they do it to varying degrees. The Invasion of the Body Snatchers, True Grit, and Scarface. And I will spoil them all, if not by giving away plot details, then with milquetoast sass. Anyway, there are 4 Body Snatchers movies. 4. But we're only talking about the first 2. Yeah, 4 of them, and the last one's in 2007. What's that? Oh, Nicole Kidman. No, not really. The Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1956, based on the book just called The Body Snatchers from the previous year, is about the invasion of a small town by an alien force that seeks to replicate and replace the local population.
This is an emergency! Emergency! Now look, there's been...
Although apparently unintentional, Don Siegel's film seemingly reflects contemporary fear of communist penetration of American society. It's all that enviable, precious bodily fluid. It's a well-made film with some genuinely creepy moments, not least the gathering of the replicated people in the town square. But despite the 1956 film being enjoyable and interesting and well done, it is very much of its time.
Only when we have to fight to stay human do we realize how precious it is to us. How dear. As you are to me.
The 1978 remake brings us up to date, at least in the delivery. There's no 1950s acting.
Recombining us, changing us. Of course, this is just the same way those rocket ships landed thousands of years ago so those spacemen could mate with monkeys and apes and create the human race. It's happening now.
The Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 78 takes the concept and doesn't change anything to the fundamentals of the narrative, but it feels like an entirely different, new story. Visually and technically, there were many more options for the director, Philip Kaufman. It was always going to be in colour, it was always going to look different. But the film isn't set in a small town. Its characters are different people and fulfill different roles. The core is the same, the idea, but the other things, not just the superficial things, are different. And the concept is explored and built upon. The panic and paranoia is still there, but it feels as though rather than reflecting fears of communist infiltration, it's more about reflecting fears of paranoia from that.
What do you want to do?
Well, if I could get official support, I'd institute the same kind of emergency procedures that we use for a cholera epidemic or Legionnaire's disease, that kind of.
What do you want me to do?
I'm not coming from outer space.
Why not, Jack?
I'm not coming from outer space, Nancy.
Why?
Well, what are you talking about? A space flower?
Some people have said that the film is about individuality, or about letting go of the self. Whatever the interpretation, I think it's clear that the filmmakers explored and engaged with the concept in a real and meaningful way. It feels rare for remakes to do that, and I think it's rarer for them to do it and get things right. The 2014 remake of Robocop tried to explore the concept, but I'd argue it focused on the wrong things and overlooked any facet of irony, or sense of humour.
He'll be paralyzed from the waist down, confined to a wheelchair. Mrs. Murphy, we don't have to do this.
The first two Body Snatchers films are very different, but they both toy with the same ideas. A more similar pair are the True Grit films from 1969 and 2010. Both films follow the same story closely, with some of the scenes of the first film merged or altered seemingly for pace or directorial preference. The story, set in the late 19th century, follows a determined teenage girl as she at first looks for Steve Bannon, US Marshal Rooster Coburn.
You're trying to take advantage of me.
I'm giving you my children's rights.
Employs him, and then pursues her father's murderer. It's a classic Western tale of revenge, and both films share a great deal, not only in terms of narrative beats.
Your partner's killed you, and I've done for him.
Your partner's killed you and I've done for him.
If you would like to kiss him, it will be all right.
If you'd like to kiss him, it would be all right.
Thank you, the spirit has flown.
You are responsible.
I admire your sand, but I'm not liable.
Yeah, I admire your sand, but I believe you will find I'm not liable for such claims.
You were the custodian.
Obviously, the 2010 film, directed and produced by the Coen brothers, is more technically versatile. 40 Years does that. The first film does have some interesting landscape, but the Coens' film is, rather than constrained by technical limitations, enhanced with modern cinematography. There's the mystery of what the US Marshal looks like, aided by use of light. There's photography at night, actual real night, and there are some moments of hard to do in the 60s mise-en-scène that you can't help but remember.
You are not LaBeef.
True Grit 2010 might be called a technical remake. There's no weird cuts here, it looks and sounds great, but I think there's more going on. The Coens injected a bit more irony into the film, not that the first was lacking humour. I also think it's quite subversive. The Coens have hinted that it was important to them, that the toughness and bleakness of the book, the grit, was present. I'm not sure it always does that as much as it could have, though at times it does. There's a moment in the 1969 film where Rooster Coburn visits Bagby's store for information. In the 2010 film, there's instead this.
Hey! Stay here, sister. I'll see Bagby.
Also in the earlier film, we see a hanging where three men, who we never meet, are killed. In the Coens film, it's this.
Before I am hanged, I would like to say, although...
That's surely a comment, in a way, about the West and the times. But even with that, True Grit isn't Body Snatchers. It's not a concept deconstructed and rebuilt, but rather a separate artistic interpretation of a shared source. It's always aware of making connections to its predecessor, but it's very much its own thing. Despite having so many similarities, it feels perhaps truer to call the 2010 True Grit an adaptation of a book that was previously adapted, although one that acknowledges, pokes, but also rekindles the first.
You
give out very little sugar with your pronouncements. While I sat there watching you, I gave some thought to stealing a kiss.
Although you are very young.
And I think that's a similar situation for Scarface, although it's less referential. Scarface from 1983 is a remake of the 1932 movie, and they're both about a very unlikable gangster who's very determined to rise to the top, and who has a scar on his face.
Kind of gaudy, isn't it?
Ain't it though?
They're very different, although if you've not seen the earlier film, don't be fooled into thinking it's not got teeth. The 83 remake, directed by Brian De Palma, may not be championed by all, but it's an imaginative and I would argue frightening retelling. One of the things I really like about Scarface 1983 is its oppressive tone, and I remember a lot of that coming from The Heat. It's like Soylent Green in that it feels as though everything is 150 degrees and about to explode. But I think Scarface missed an opportunity for introspection. It feels as though, in terms of concept, it's been modernised but not really considered.
You want a job, Willie?
This is why I keep coming back to the impotent Robocop remake. Not the worst film ever made, but a modernisation of a film that got better the less modern it became. What I mean is, with the Robocop remake, it's clear the producers were well aware they needed to update a lot of things, but they focused on the superficial. With the original, and the way Verhoeven handled it, it clearly reflects contemporary fears and disdain of corporate culture and corruption. It represents and reflects a lot of what was going on at the time. Scarface from 1932 does the same, and whilst the Cockroaches update does too, with coke and corruption and bathtubs full of Pacino, it is, in a way, arbitrary. It's there, I feel, because this is a gangster film, and this is what gangsters do now. I'm not saying that De Palma should have thrown everything out, or made Tony Montana into Mr. Brownflake's Paul Rudd, Phoebe's boyfriend MD, but compared to Body Snatchers, it feels as though it's not adding much, but rather repackaging it nicely. Also, there's the 2018 remake of Scarface to consider, and I will, when it comes out, in 3 years. Of course, examining and evolving the original concept is my own idea of what makes a remake good. I think a broader take might be a film that doesn't trample over the original and is entertaining in its own right. A film has to succeed despite its IP, not because of it. John Carpenter's The Thing, here we go again, uses an established concept in an original way. The 2011 remake does not. It's not a retelling of a story or a reimagining of a concept, but a rehashing. And there's the conclusion. The Thing 1982 brings a lot of its own ideas to the table. Scarface may not have had a witty pivot on the concept, but it's not a rehashing. It didn't sell itself on being that film your granddad went to see in his spats. True Grit from 2010 has many similarities to the '69 film, but tonally it is different. These films are all their own films.
A caper.
A rat turd.
A caper.
If it's a caper, eat it.
The best remakes, or reboots, or whatever they're called in the future, aren't remakes at all, but reimaginings, looking to expand on the original, rather than leech off its success. By the way, have you seen The Predator?